Hello and welcome to the Majlis Podcast, ready for the Liberties current affairs talk show focusing on Central Asia. I'm Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis and ready for the Liberties media manager here in Washington, D.C. The authorities in Tajikistan and the Taliban militants across the border in Afghanistan have never been on good terms, but the collapse of Kabul to the Taliban on August 15 has started a new round of tension between the sides. Initially started as the war of words, but in recent days we are increasingly getting reports about the possibility of an actual armed conflict. The latest signs of tensions are intensified military activities, the Afghan Taliban arming up the Tajikistani militants who are sheltering in Afghanistan, and growing rhetoric about possible cross-border incursions. So on today's Majlis Podcast, we are here to recap the latest developments to understand what they mean, how serious is this, and where things are headed beyond this point. To discuss all these, I'm joined by Dr. Susana Levy-Sanchez, Associate Professor at the U.S. Naval War College, author of an upcoming book on bridging state and civil society, informal organizations in Tajik-Afghan Badakhshan. Milani Sadouze, PhD candidate at INALCO in France and a visiting scholar at George Washington University, who has recently visited the Tajik-Afghan border for her research. Selimjan Ayubov, the director of Ready for the Liberties Tajik service, and Bruce Pannier, the editor of Ready for the Liberties Central Asia blog, Kishlok Owazi. Thank you, colleagues, for joining us today on this very important conversation. So, Selimjan, I can't keep up with the developments involving Tajikistan and Afghanistan these days. Don't know if it is relevant to what we are going to talk about today. I think Ready for the Liberty has or about to release another report based on interviews with Afghan pilots who are stranded in Tajikistan. As it is known, those pilots have come to Tajikistan earlier, escaping the Taliban. I'm sure by the time this podcast will be up, this might be an old news, but let's start from this, Selimjan. Any insight into what we have learned from these interviews?
Yeah, it was difficult. First of all, it was difficult to find the location where those pilots and Afghan militaries who fled Afghanistan have been held by the Tajik authorities. The place has been keeping in secret, but our colleagues succeeded in finding the place, and it was impossible officially to approach those pilots and talk to them, but so some small accident helped my colleagues to talk to them. The story will be out in a few minutes, but I can share with you that there are 163 pilots and Afghan militaries. Previously, we thought the number is something more or less 140, and not one woman, but two female pilots are inside of this sanatorium, and all of them are stranded there and have no right to go out of the compound. And the mobile phones were confiscated. And what we know now that they are doing not bad. They are provided with food, water, medical help, and the Tajik authorities are telling them that they are negotiating about their future, what to do with them. As they say, most probably they will be transferred to the third countries.
This situation kind of reminds me of Afghan pilots who were stranded in Uzbekistan for weeks, and Tashkent was threatening to send them back to Afghanistan if they are not transferred to third country, which finally happened, I guess. So they are now in United Arab Emirates. At least that was the last news we heard about this. So the fact that you were able to reach to them, and of course you said officially it was impossible. What's the discussion among the authorities in Tajikistan? What are their intentions about the future of those people? And also, we learned, as a result of your report, Selimjan, you just mentioned, that there are total 163 pilots, 2 female pilots among them. Do we also know anything about the military equipments that they brought with them to Tajikistan? Any number, any concrete details about that?
Muhammad, unfortunately, we know nothing about that. The authorities are not either confirming that they are holding those people or denying. My colleagues are saying that all the journalists in Dushanbe no matter the Tajik journalists, foreign journalists are looking for those pilots in every opportunity. And some of them traveled the whole Varzov Valley, but we found them completely in different place. So unfortunately, the authorities are not ready to talk about them, either about their current condition or their future.
What is your reading about authorities' mind in terms of what they want to do about them going forward?
One thing is quite clear that they wanted to talk to other countries and to find whoever ready to accept those pilots. Most probably, some pilots also do not want to stay in Afghanistan. As we know, based on previous experience and previous interviews, many Afghans who fled Afghanistan and reached Tajikistan, they are not thinking to stay in Tajikistan. Only a few of them are thinking to stay here because the Tajikistan itself, there is no job, no normal, let's say, help for refugees, no conditions. And they are thinking about just to be about third countries and most probably Europe or the United States, things like this. But again, authorities are not sharing the information with whom they are speaking, talking, and what will be the decision and why they are keeping those people for so long and what the reason. So zero information on that.
Very interesting. I also wondered, Bruce, your thoughts on that. I mean, earlier I mentioned the similar scenario being repeated in Uzbekistan. In Uzbekistan's case, as we discussed in our previous episodes, we knew why Uzbekistan is trying to push them out of the country, because Tashkent didn't want to upset Taliban because by keeping those people on its soil. So here, Tajikistan doesn't have that problem. Tajikistan's relations with the Taliban is already known. It's not good. So what's your reading of Tajikistan's authorities about what they are doing about those pilots and what they might do going forward?
Well, I think your explanation or review of recent events pretty much gives us the reasons that we need to see that. In Uzbekistan's case, they wanted to establish some kind of rapport with the Taliban, and the presence of Afghan military personnel on Uzbek territory was an impediment, an obstacle to keeping a dialogue going with the Taliban. Now, the Tajikistan hasn't sought any dialogue with the Taliban. They still talk. They make statements, but they don't talk to each other at all. So they're in kind of a different position where they can still keep these people on Tajik territory because they have nothing to lose. I mean, they don't really have much of a relationship with the Taliban. That said, for what it's worth, I mean, they said they're still exporting electricity to Afghanistan. But that's, of course, for the Afghan people. But I mean, really, Tajikistan has nothing to lose by keeping these pilots. They don't have a dialogue going with the Taliban at the moment. So, it's easier for them than Uzbekistan. And we saw today, for instance, that Uzbek Foreign Minister Abdulaziz Kamilov was in Kabul. So this is part of the fact that it makes it easier for him to make this visit because all the Afghan military personnel have left Uzbekistan and gone to third countries. Whereas, like I said, Tajikistan won't be at that point for a long time. They're in a different situation.
Yeah. Let's get back to the actual topic that we had in mind to talk about today. Now, today's report earlier, and Melanie, thank you very much for sharing that report from Asia Plus. The report is talking about Mehdi Arsalan's comments. As we know, at least he's what is reported on the press, is the leader of what's known as Tajik Taliban, the Tajikistani militants sheltering under the Taliban in Afghanistan. So he sort of, at least as per this report, he sort of threatens to invade Tajikistan. How serious you find this comment?
Like you said, it's really hard to keep up with the development of this situation. It seems like every day new news is coming up, and all those news are contradicting each other sometimes. So today we found out indeed that it was on a Russian website to start with, that this Russian website was quoting a Telegram post about this Tajikistani Taliban, quote unquote, who was willing and ready to invade Tajikistan. But at the same time, just like 2 hours after that, the Taliban have sent also another communication in which they say that they were willing to discuss with Tajikistan. So it's really hard to know where the actual truth is. But what we can see is that the Taliban seem to be lacking control on those militants in the northern parts of Afghanistan. And also in this Telegram canal communication, it wasn't on behalf of the Taliban, apparently, that this communication was made. So it's really hard to know what's true and what's not true, because, the topic is extremely sensitive now, and everything must be really carefully, verified by talking to people who are there, by talking to communities living at the border. And so far, at least in the Darwaz area, in the eastern part of the northern Badakhshan, those Tajikistani militants are not seen literally at the border. They seem to be more inland and not actually at the border. So we must be extremely careful with this information.
Yeah, of course, we need to be careful. But also, it's hard to get news from the ground. Tajikistani authorities are not talking to media in terms of their intentions. Of course, occasionally you see these public statements, Rahman talking about Taliban and the inclusive government, and then you see the sporadic news coming out. And one of those was recently, perhaps, Dr. Sanchez, you could jump in here. So Arslan's comment follows the statement by the Tajik authorities that indeed militants in Afghan side of the border are planning to threaten Tajikistan. A couple of days have passed since that statement. Was there any bone in what the authorities were talking about when they say the militants on the Afghan side of the border might be planning to destabilize Tajikistan or something in that form or shape?
I'm going to outline this in a few ways. One is Jamaat Ansarullah, which is now, I guess, being called Lashkar-e-Mansouri Martyrdom Battalion by the Taliban, according to your outlet. Where are they along the border? Who controls them, and where are they not along the border? Today I spoke to someone in the Wakhan, I spoke to someone who is just in Panjshir, and I spoke to someone in the western part of Badakhshan. And from what I understand from these sources, among others, is that Jamaat Ansarullah is in the western section from Darwaz, but they are not in Ishkashim or Wakhan or Shugnan. And that there are Tajik Taliban controlled by and Pashtuns in those areas, but that Jamaat Ansarullah is answering to the Taliban and not to a group like ISIS or another group at this point. So then you have to wonder, what does the Taliban or Jamaat Ansarullah get from destabilizing Tajikistan? And they get nothing. And I think that's why the Taliban keeps saying that's not our goal. Well, I don't know what this Arslan quote or not, but I do know that the issue really is Jamaat Ansarullah was part of the initial Taliban takeover. So they're going to want their sort of piece of the pie. And they control a series of districts that are along drug trafficking routes. So they're getting a piece of the pie right now. While, of course, the Taliban is not a cohesive, coherent government, and there's a bunch of disparate groups, they are not going completely rogue. So while there might be some chest beating among sides, I do know that the CSTO is going to have 3 drills coming up from October 10th to the 23rd, and that there have been other drills in September 27th and 30th in Badakhshan, Gorno-Badakhshan. I think that's more of a Ramon trying to leverage what he has against the Taliban to say, you need to control your people because we will take action. But I honestly do not think the Taliban have anything to gain from starting any conflict. There's drug trafficking lanes and trafficking lanes that are still happily moving along, and nobody really wants those to stop either. So that's an incentive, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, but one thing, Dr. Sanchez, there, actually a couple of things. One is now by this time it is proven that Taliban have put Arslan or his group in charge of areas in terms of security which are close to Tajikistan. And the second is recently we have also reported, and a couple of others, based on eyewitness reports on the ground, that Taliban have been arming those people, providing them latest weaponry versus they used to be using old pickup trucks. Now they are running Humvees and using the latest weaponry. That's also proven. And the third thing is, just to kind of counter your argument there, I am sure that President Rahman certainly have sources among those people. So, I mean, when he says something, I'm guessing that it shouldn't be out of the blue, I guess. That's what my understanding is.
Yeah, well, I completely, my sources on the ground also confirm that Jamaat Ansarullah have been armed and that the Taliban have given them legitimacy. I confirmed what you guys reported, which is Kufa, Bahan, Mamai, Nusai, Shikan. But them, I mean, so think about it this way. Tajikistan sent a bunch of troops to the border, and then they had a bunch of exercises. So Taliban, as in, has also increased their control of that border, right? I mean, this is just my opinion, but that doesn't mean they're going to start a fight or a cross-border conflict.
But certainly they are giving sign of some sort to Tajikistan, some sort of message to Tajikistan, isn't it? I mean, they should know better. I mean, this is going to give wrong signal to the other side of the border. If their intention is not this, then why don't Taliban, send those Tajikistani militants to some other parts of the country like they did with Uyghurs?
I would assume, what I could anecdotally assume, is that Jamaat Ansarullah, because they helped win the country for the Taliban initially, the Taliban owe them. And so they're going to allow the Jamaat Ansarullah to continue there, which of course is going to upset Tajikistan. Tajikistan is already upset for many other reasons as well with the Taliban. So there does seem to be a bit of a security dilemma where they are both increasing the buildup of the border. And I mean, I do wonder, so how much control does Jamaat Ansarullah have on their own, and how much are they answering to the Taliban? That has always been a huge problem in Afghanistan. There's never been a coherent or cohesive control of any group. They're sort of these loose affiliates. And from the way the Taliban allow these foreign fighters to operate, from what I understand, I think Gustiosi is the one who wrote about this, they are allowed to go into these districts, and basically the bounty that they get from the districts is their pay. So if that method of paying fighters is still going on, then Jamaat Ansarullah is expecting to be able to control their sort of money-making or trafficking routes in that area. And, so I feel like I'm not giving you a definitive answer. I'm pushing back a little bit because I do not think there's going to be war between the two sides, because there's incentives on both sides to not have that. Yeah. And I don't think that Russia and China as well. And I do think Ramon has reasons to answer to them, both in a security framework as well as in an economic framework, which I'm not going to go into. But I don't think either of them want that to blow up either.
Maybe the war might be what we are talking about here, but until the war, there are so many other leverages that they might be bluffing about. But let's bring in Salim John here. I mean, Salim John, Dr. Sanchez has a point here. She says that it's not in interest of Taliban to see Tajikistan destabilized. So there's some of the reporting that's are coming up in terms of increasing tension might be just the reports. Maybe there's not much bone in it. So when you look into these developments from Dushanbe and try to read the brain of President Rahman and other government officials, how it looks like from Tajikistan, I mean, what is happening in Afghanistan and why it is happening. And also where Taliban stands in this. Of course, Arslan's comment was very specific. If that's true, we don't know at this moment because there are so many confusion in terms of the credibility of reports that we are getting. From that perspective, I mean, I'm just guessing, maybe I'm talking too much here, I'm just guessing that Arslan should not be able to give statements like that without Taliban letting him to give. All in all, how it looks like from Tajikistan.
Mohammed, first of all, I support what Melanie pointed out, that one thing we know for sure, that something is going on there. Something is preparing itself, but we don't know exactly what. Second, yes, we decided not to publish this news about Mahdi Arsalan since it was based on a single source on Telegram, and the source was not credible to us. And it's interesting that the Russian media widely used this information, and some of them even started saying that in some minutes the war between Afghanistan and Tajikistan will start. But the reality reality is more complex. And just a few hours after this news, we received another news that the Taliban leadership said that they are looking for diplomacy to reduce tensions with Dushanbe. Even a member of the Cultural Commission, Ministry of Information and Culture, Ruhollah Omari, called Tajikistan a good neighbor. So this one sign. Second, Tajikistan is not cutting off electricity export to Afghanistan. So those signs are telling that those sides are not on the edge of war. But first of all, it's looking like the structure, the vertical of the government of Taliban is not working as we understand one government should work, even in countries like Tajikistan. Of course, in Tajikistan, even stronger because it's authoritarian rule. And especially in Badakhshan province of Afghanistan, there is a lot of things are going on. First of all, so the current head of the province, Khori Fasihuddin, succeeded in sending 2 of his deputies to the central government. And those 2 deputies were his personal rivals in the government of Badakhshan province. And we can understand that. And even Mahdi Arsalan right now is in Faizabad. He is not at the border. He is in the provincial center. And it's looking like Fasihuddin, who is a Panjshiri Tajik, is trying to build his own empire. And Melanie is right. This empire includes a lot of routes for drug trafficking, for trafficking some other things either through Tajikistan or even Pakistan. And that's why the news that came first from Moskovsky Komsomolis was not reliable to us based on this Telegram channel. Mm-hmm. So it's looking like they are still working inside of their own structure. And probably if those type of statement was done by Mahdi Arsalan, I believe it was not done. But if somebody have done this or somebody needed it, and most probably it's a kind of just rhetorical, just a banner that this group is still thinking about intrusion into Tajikistan. Mm-hmm. And again, we shouldn't expect any kind of real war at the border itself, because we know that Tajikistan mobilized a lot of powers, a lot of military power there, and Russia is just 20 kilometers from the border. And new drills are going on. So there will be no face-to-face war at the border on the Panj or Omo River. Mm-hmm. There will be no intrusion. If Ansarullah someday will asked by Taliban or by someone else who pay more than Taliban and who will promise them to save them inside of Afghanistan, so there will be just the infiltration inside of Tajikistan and some small intrusion in different places, but not at the border.
Mm-hmm. I also don't know, of course, maybe nobody knows about the military might of this man, Arslan, that we are talking about. I mean, in case if he was talking about this, and again, we have lots of questions about the credibility of this reporting coming out of Russia through this Telegram channels. So we have lots of questions, lots of caveat there. But in case if he is genuinely talking or thinking about things like that, I mean, on behalf of how many people he's talking about? I mean, how do we know about the military might of this man?
We know that overall people from the Central Asia and especially from Tajikistan are somehow about 200. But what we know for sure from many sources that he personally commands 60 armed men. That's what we have.
Okay, so let's not jump into and talk about the imminent war or something that some of the Russian media is talking about, but it's also clear that it is no more just simple war of words anymore. There are more into this. There are, reports about Taliban arming up those people and moving closer to the border, and, sporadic comments coming out from both sides of the border, from the officials, from the authorities. Also recall that in our earlier conversations, Bruce, you will recall that an expert said that this might be just a bluff what President Rahman is saying. And then the other interpretation was that he might be playing a bad cop, a good cop thing, like in a sense that he might be bad cop while the Russia or some other regional countries might be playing good cop in terms of the dealing with the Taliban. Are we still talking about this after this stage, or maybe there are more into this? Let's continue the conversation talking about some of these points and also look into what might be coming next after this stage. First, let me recap the debate that today on the Majlis Podcast. I'm joined by Dr. Susanna Levy-Sanchez, Associate Professor at U.S. Naval War College, Melanie Sadouze, a visiting scholar at the George Washington University, Salim John Ayubov, the Director of Radio Free Europe Liberties Tajik Service, Bruce Pannier, the Editor of Radio Free Europe Liberties Central Asia blog, Kishlok Owozi. I'm Mohammed Tahir, host of the Majlis and Radio Free Europe Liberties Media Manager here in Washington, D.C., and we are discussing the growing tension between the Tajik government and the Taliban in Afghanistan. Okay, Bruce, maybe I will start with you with the similar question. So, very blunt one. How likely is it that there will be sort of a armed tension on the border involving both sides?
I think Salim John probably put it best by saying there won't be a war along the border. There's a couple of things worth remembering here. You mentioned Rahman's rhetoric, of course, which hasn't helped in this case at all. But, the Tajikistan is harboring people who were leaders from the Panjshir Valley. And they've let the Afghan ambassador from Ghani's government make a lot of statements, too. It seems to be like it's the anti-Taliban conduit. In Central Asia, it goes through Tajikistan. So it's gotten Rahman a lot of attention, positive attention from people who don't like the Taliban to be in there. But, the fact that he is harboring the leadership of what people perceive as the last resistance of the Taliban, certainly doesn't make the Taliban very happy. But of course, if there's fighting along the border, and that's why I agree that I don't see how that's going to happen, because if they do actually attack, and even if it is just Jamaat Ansarullah who attacks, if they attack on the border and they're coming from Afghanistan, that invokes security treaties from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Collective Security Treaty Organization, where both those organizations would be obligated to come and help Tajikistan defend their territory against an aggressor. So, and we know that China has significant influence with the Taliban, so they've undoubtedly sent the message to Kabul already that this is something that they don't want, and they probably would affect the amount of money and humanitarian aid that China has been talking about sending to Afghanistan. Russia would be in the same boat with the Collective Security Treaty Organization and also the Shanghai Cooperation Organization too, so they wouldn't want that. But this group that we're talking about, Jamaat Ansarullah, is very useful to the Taliban because they are Tajik citizens, and Salim John alluded to that this is the problem. If the Tajik government proved to be obstinate and was perceived as helping the resistance inside Afghanistan against the Taliban, if you can get these people from Ansarullah into Tajikistan, well away from the border, inside Tajikistan, to cause, just carry out terrorist attacks and stuff, then all of a sudden this becomes a whole different situation. This is not an invasion. This is an internal problem among Tajik citizens. But it would in effect distract the Tajik government's attention away from the border, because they would have their own internal security threat that they would have to deal with. But that doesn't necessarily,
but in the meantime,
the fine reading of these treaties obligate China, Russia, and other people to come to the help of Tajikistan, because it is essentially about fight between citizens of Tajikistan at that point, and not a border incursion.
Sure, but in the meantime, if that's what's likely, Tajikistan also knows that those people are coming from Afghanistan. So Taliban is, even if they want or don't want, they are a party to this. At least this is how it's going to be seen from Tajikistan, isn't it?
Dr. Levy-Sanchez pointed out, too, that we don't know how much control they have over these people. Right? And the Taliban could certainly disavow this and disown them and say, we didn't tell them to do that. They have their own personal grudge with the Tajik government, and they decided on their own to sneak into Tajikistan and carry out attacks. It wasn't something that we told them to do. Even if they did tell them to do it, they can at least say, we don't know anything about this. They're not citizens of Afghanistan, technically. We didn't recommend they do it. And so, we don't have any ownership over this problem whatsoever.
How likely is this scenario? Dr. Sanchez, please feel free to jump in. Also, Melanie, any one of you.
I'd like to piggyback, if I could, on what Bruce Pannier just said. I think that the fact that Jamaat Ansarullah was helping the Taliban from the beginning is important. because this relationship and it's owed, plus prior to all of that, they were there as well. And what I wrote on, I think, July 6th is, what is Jamaat Ansarullah going to want, and who are they going to ally with? So at this point, from my sources on the ground, ISIS is trying to make headway in some of the districts. And I think that's important. I don't think ISIS has a big presence, but obviously they're creating some problems. Yeah. This is my speculation. It's only speculation. Right. If Jamaat Ansarullah is unhappy with their relationship with the Taliban, or part of Jamaat Ansarullah that is there, will they partner with ISIS? And I think that if there are these potential little fights or cellular terrorist attacks that occur deeper into Tajikistan, I think that's only going to be the Arsalan-led fighters or Ansarullah that are unhappy with the Taliban and that have decided to join a more ISIS-style cell. And I do think that's a possibility, because I don't think there's a cohesive governance by any means. I mean, the Taliban don't have control fully over the security forces, over the economy, over social welfare programs. They're not paying civil servants. I mean, there's huge problems. So does that make sense? So my feeling is, if they do go into Tajikistan, it's not going to be through the Taliban. And I do believe, while I do think the Taliban are not doing a good job governing and they are committing atrocities, I do think that their calls for some kind of diplomatic discussions to decrease the tensions are true. And I think there's a lot of stuff that comes out of Russia that is very difficult to confirm. I question that telegram. Until I have 3 or 4 more sources that are saying that Arsalan is saying this, I'm going to question that.
Yeah, so certainly we have lots of questions about what comes out of those channels, Russian media. They talk about lots of things. We don't understand why they are doing that based on, kind of shady sources. A part of that, we also know that those Tajikistani militants based in Afghanistan are there for a reason. They don't like Rahman's government, right? They cannot go back to Tajikistan. If they do, they will be persecuted. They know they will be put in jail at best, right? Rahman don't like them, and they don't like Rahman. So there is that thing. And also, the Taliban, for some reason, I don't know why, for some reason, they are sort of sheltering them and also providing them equipments and arms. I don't know why, but that's what the reportings are. So what you were talking about is, there might not be a war, full-fledged war between these two countries, Afghanistan run under the Taliban. But is it a possibility that those militants, without knowledge of the Taliban, just go inside and do something bad, and then it becomes suddenly a huge problem?
I think it's absolutely a potential. And what I was saying earlier is that I think that they would do it on their own. They would somehow be in disagreement with the Taliban, or they would decide that they wanted their own country, right, and go into Tajikistan. But I think that if they did that, I do not think the Taliban would support them, and they'd have to get other supporters. And that's why I'm pointing to a sort of ISIS affiliate support. Or I have a hard time believing that they would, on their own, given their small numbers, go into Tajikistan and actually try to fight the government directly. But I think there's a potential for small terrorist attacks for sure. And but I do think they would look for supporters for that. And again, I just do not think the Taliban are going to support that. They need energy from Tajikistan. They want the drug trafficking to continue. And China and Russia, who are supporting both the Taliban government as well as the Tajik government, do not want that to happen.
Yes,
so this would have to be a rogue mission, rogue attacks inside the country. And then who's supporting that? Is that ISIS, right? Or is that somehow Jamaat Ansarullah getting their own funding from the drug trafficking that they're controlling in Afghanistan? That's also a serious concern, because since they're controlling the Nusai area, they're controlling drug trafficking through that area, and that's a large amount of money. So they might try to also fund their own operations. But again, I'm just completely speculating.
Yeah, sure. Well, in many cases, we are all speculating here today. But even the possibility of that, like some of those rogue elements within Jamaat Ansarullah going to Tajikistan and doing something bad, which will end up not be good to the Taliban, for instance. Even the idea of is enough for me, if I were to be Taliban, to keep me awake at night. So if Taliban doesn't want that to happen, why they just don't get rid of them? Not rid of them in a sense, like just send them away, like don't give them arms and don't assign them for the security on the Tajik border. Why they don't do that?
Well, I mean, you could think about it two ways. Jamaat Ansarullah could have said to the Taliban government, if you don't make us a legitimate sort of brigade or battalion, we're going to join different forces. So there could have been a threat. But there also could be what I was talking about earlier is we have to recognize that Tajikistan and Russia supporting them are building up the border. And the Taliban may have wanted to say, we can flex our muscles too. You know, we can threaten you with something that might hurt you, which is Jamaat Ansarullah, since you are threatening us. So it's either that or they don't have control, in my mind, control over Jamaat Ansarullah, and they had to give them something and more legitimate. And it's better for the Taliban to make Ansarullah more legitimate than to have Ansarullah either become completely independent or join an ISIS style or other kind of, so I mean, it's really complicated. But
it looks like, how you also make them legitimate without upsetting Tajikistan on the other side. I mean, as you said, it's very, very complicated. And we need to conclude the discussion very soon. But one thing is clear here. I mean, feel free to jump in, Bruce, if you like to, or Melanie. Now, for me, after this conversation, one thing is clear to me is that the whole tension is not about Rahman's demand about the inclusive government anymore, right?
If I may jump in, I actually think he's not really going to change his position on the, we say inclusive government, but really what he wants is a multi-ethnic government, right? That includes,
of course. Of course, that was his initial demand. But I'm saying the current level of tension is just not limited with that point anymore, I guess. That's what my point was.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just limited to that. And if you actually take a look at his Rahman's speeches, he's not only mentioning that, he's also pointing the massacres, the violence of the Taliban. He's also blaming the international community for not doing enough to save Afghans. He talked to an Afghan singer. We saw that on YouTube, and he told him, we'll always be there for you. Don't worry. So he's sort of opening his hands to the Afghans. So there's more than just asking for a multi-ethnic government. But in my opinion, it's all about deterrence. It's all about, on both sides, on the side of the Taliban and on the side of the Tajikistani government. It's a war on words to deter the other part, prevent them from actually doing anything. But indeed, it's not just limited to what Rahman is asking from the Taliban. And apparently, what I think is very interesting here, and we haven't mentioned that, is the role of Pakistan, because Pakistan is going to be the one, in between in the canal should negotiations take place between Tajikistan and the Taliban. So that's something we need to really look at in the future, what Pakistan is gonna do in this whole situation.
I think when Pakistani Prime Minister was in Dushanbe last time for the meeting, the big meeting there, the promise that he came back to Pakistan with was that he's going to help, I guess that was the word, help to arrange a meeting between Taliban and Tajik authorities, ideally in Dushanbe. I'm just wondering if the recent comment that earlier you mentioned, Melanie, by the Taliban that they are ready to talk to Tajik authorities, maybe it is in reference to that or something else?
No, I think it's actually the logical following of what Imran Khan, so the Prime Minister of Pakistan, has actually said. It seems like he has delivered on what he said when he met with President Rahman, because exactly what he said, I will work on this multi-ethnic government with the Taliban. So that's sort of like the promise that he said. He officially, if I quote what he said, I have initiated a dialogue with the Taliban for an inclusive Afghan government to include Tajiks, Hazaras, and Uzbeks. So it seems like he has delivered on that. We don't have any confirmation. But
I don't know if you are referring to the next round of their appointments, right? I mean, yeah, they certainly put one Hazara and also one or two deputy ministers.
No. I was saying that it seems that Prime Minister of Pakistan has actually talked to the Taliban in order to, work on this more inclusive government. I'm not saying it's inclusive at all. I'm just saying that from the last report we have from the Taliban's declaration is that, they're willing to work on diplomatic relations with the Taliban. And it seems like it's a sign that Pakistan has been involved in this conflict.
Yeah, without Pakistan being involved, apparently, when it comes to Taliban, needle doesn't move anywhere, I guess, these days. But we need to, we need to move on, and also we need to wrap up the conversation. Just a very, very last point here. We've spoken about this in the last part of our conversation. The Taliban has signaled that they are ready to talk to Tajik authorities, which apparently is good signal in light of what the signs that we have been earlier getting, like these war of words, then these comments by some of the Tajikistani militants here. Going forward from here, so where our eyes should be, Bruce or Salim John, determine where things are headed from here.
Okay, well, you know what? I'll go first because Salim John will have undoubtedly have a better point. Tajikistan needs to talk to the Taliban, that's for sure. I don't think they're going to change their stance that much. What Rahman defending the ethnic Tajiks in Afghanistan plays very well to his domestic audience. He's an unpopular generally, but this is one particular subtopic that he's been able to capitalize on and get his own people behind him on that. And let's face it, Tajikistan, and maybe Salim John knows better than me, I couldn't even begin to tell you how many hundreds of millions of dollars have been poured into Tajikistan because it borders unstable Afghanistan. Now, the minute he reaches an agreement with the Taliban, and if it looks like that's going to work, and that there really isn't a problem along the Tajik-Afghan border, he's going to see a lot less money being poured into his country, and that they're surviving on that money, basically. Not just what they steal, but donor aid and things like that, too. So it's kind of a loser for Rahman to reach a solid agreement with the Taliban that removes all the tension between the two parties.
Salim John, how do you see the future going forward from here between the Taliban and President Rahman and his government? Where they are headed with this?
I fully support what Bruce said. The situation is very good for the leader of the country who has been keeping this country because of the international aid. But regarding Ansarullah, as our colleagues, our experts are saying that the Taliban's attitude towards Ansarullah will somehow relate to the Tajikistan's relationship with the resistance in Panjshir or resistance leaders. We are hearing that in some coming days, maybe or weeks, there will be a gathering in Dushanbe, and many former members of Ghani's government, we are hearing. It's unconfirmed, but the negotiations between those people are going on, and probably there will be some meeting. And just yesterday, they asked Rahman to help them to make Dushanbe as a place for negotiations between resistance and Taliban. We don't know the Taliban's reaction on it. But again, the relationship between Tajikistan and the resistance and the relationship between Taliban and Ansarullah, they will be playing on somehow in changes in one relationship will cause a relationship in other relations. I mean, both sides will use those groups as tools between
bargaining chip,
between each other. But what Dr. Sainz has pointed out that the threat of moving Ansarullah from Taliban towards ISIS is very big because anyway. We know that Taliban will want peaceful relationship with Tajikistan. They want recognition and so on. And Ansarullah is not in this game, in this play. And most probably, when the relationship will be fixed with Dushanbe, Ansarullah will be sent to Nangarhar or to some other place. But what will be the reaction of Ansarullah also, we don't know. So it's possible that they will join other groups and will continue their ways. They, even many years ago, when they formed it, they said, our last point is Dushanbe, our last point is Tajikistan.
I guess there are a lot to keep our eyes on. In case of Tajikistan, they are working with anti-Taliban resistance groups. On the other side, Taliban are using those militants as a bargaining chip. That's certainly something that we need to keep our eyes on. And also, in case if there is some sort of rapprochement between Taliban and the Tajik authorities, what the reaction Ansarullah will show, as Salim John is saying, that they are not in this game. So there are a lot to keep our eyes on going forward. But unfortunately, we have to conclude the discussion here. Thank you very much, Selim Jan Ayubov, the Director of Radio Free People Liberties Tajik Service, Dr. Susana Levy Sanchez, Associate Professor at U.S. Naval War College and author of an upcoming book on bridging state and civil society informal organizations in Tajik-Afghan Badakhshan. Also, Milani Saduzey, a visiting scholar at the George Washington University, and Bruce Pannier, the editor of Radio Free People Liberties Central Asia blog. Kishlok Owazi. Thank you, colleagues, for your time today. And this is from me, Mohammed Tahir, Radio Free People Liberties media manager and host of the Majlis Podcast, focusing on Central Asia. Until next week, bye-bye.